Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of the Beautifully Broken podcast. So honored to be in this space today with Dr. Evan Hirsch. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on, Freddie. You can call me Evan.
Evan, I love it. I love it. So let's jump in. Evan, you have what do I want to say? You have like a slide desk. You know, I tell you, everybody gets, you get pitched guests all the time on the show. But yours was like the menu of choice for every listener that listened to the show. It was like chronic fatigue syndrome, long COVID, Lyme disease, Bartonella. I was like, I got to have this guy on. It was like the calling card. How did you get into that space, that conversation? Why do you work in the world of, let's say, chronic illness?
Yeah, so I started off in conventional medicine, did my family medicine residency out here, University of Washington in Olympia. And then I met my wife, fell in love. She got chronic fatigue syndrome, and I was going through my residency. I had no clue what to do about it. Felt incredibly disempowered and didn't really know what to do. Kind of talked to all of my mentors, and they really couldn't help. And so we kind of like pieced some things together. And then I graduated residency. I started my own functional medicine practice. I had been practicing holistic medicine and then integrative medicine. I actually got board certified in holistic medicine while I was going through residency. I was doing acupuncture at that time. I did the UCLA program for physicians. And so had this really nice background already in holistic, integrative, and functional medicine. But then 5 years later, I got chronic fatigue syndrome. And it lasted for 5 years and just about destroyed my business, my relationship with my wife. I had a new child, who I couldn't play with. And I was napping underneath my desk. And I had to keep hiring people to do the work that I couldn't do in my clinic. I had 10 employees, 4,000 square feet of office space, functional medicine clinic. And I was doing everything that I knew how to do. And yet I still wasn't better. So I had to go through this process of learning about environmental medicine and heavy metals and chemicals and molds and infections and then nervous system dysfunction. And that's what I call now the toxic 5, which is really the hill that I'm going to die on, where I found that that's really what got me over my chronic fatigue syndrome. That's now what helps other people in my program get over it. And then that's also the big thing that's causing so much of a problem for people with long COVID. It's more than just the spike.
Yeah, I join with you in all of that. That's been my experience. Can we define for a minute ME/CFS? Like what does that mean when people see that term?
Absolutely. So myalgic encephalomyelitis is ME. That's kind of what they call chronic fatigue syndrome outside of the US. CFS is chronic fatigue syndrome. And basically the definition is you have to have a certain number of symptoms for 6 months or longer. And those symptoms are complete exhaustion with a post-exertional malaise, where you exert yourself and you feel worse, sleep issues, brain fog, and then also body pain. So if you've got those symptoms and you've got them for longer than 6 months, you can be diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome in the United States. It doesn't mean that you're going to be able to get well, though, because unfortunately, with the conventional paradigm, they're just going to say, don't do as much and rest, and maybe eventually you'll get better, but it really just doesn't work that way. And then with myalgic encephalomyelitis, that has a little bit more of a neuro component in terms of some of the neuropathies that come into play. But it really is a spectrum, because there are people listening to this who are like, I got brain fog and I got really bad exhaustion and I don't have the other symptoms. What do I do? And it's like, just because you don't have a diagnosis doesn't mean that you don't deserve to get better. So it really is this spectrum of chronic fatigue, where there are some people who are like, I'm able to work, but my energy is a 4 out of 10. And I've tried a bunch of stuff and I'm not better, to people who can't get out of bed. And
Yeah.
so we're working mainly with people who can work a little bit. They've had to go to part-time, but they can still kind of work a little bit. We just find that, those people are more successful in our program just because they're not as debilitated.
My heart just goes out to everybody who's there right now, because I spent the better part of a decade just feeling like I'd say to doctors, I have about an hour of functionality off my coffee that is stacked with 3 shots of espresso. And after that window, it was like everything was just When I say I would think about going to the kitchen and then turn around and go back to bed, that level of fatigue was just the norm. And I definitely put on a great show for people. I could get up, I could get into a conversation, especially when I was engaged. And the larger chunk of the day was just so downtrodden with this just 1 out of 10 energy. And I would say I really started to experience this personally. It was after my second bowel resection. And it's I never came out of anesthesia. I'd
Mm.
hold my shoelaces and I'd look at them and be like, what comes next? And obviously I know how to tie my shoes, but I would ask myself that. It was what comes next? So that's how slow. I just want to give people scope for the brain processing power. Now, like you, I didn't find anybody to validate my experience or really give me much help. I was really pushed into the fringe, which is why we're here, why I have a podcast today, asking different questions, right? I just want to pick your brain about this. I found this guy down in Florida. His name was Dr. Dantini, and he was doing this really interesting thing. He was having people swish around acyclovir, high dose 4 times a day in their mouth, and it was being absorbed through his thought is that we had high viral loads, that it was this cytomegalovirus, Epstein-Barr virus. And I actually did get a little temporary benefit from this antiviral therapy. Can you speak to that, or if you've ever come across any of this thought process?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm not familiar with what he's actually doing, but a big, that hill that I'm going to die on about the toxic five, a big component of that is infections. And so,
Yeah.
people who end up as sick as we were, where you're having a hard time getting out of bed, you're just pushing through your day, you've got the exhaustion, the body pain, the brain fog, whatever it is always going to be this combination. And everybody has all of the toxic five. So they have the heavy metals, the chemicals, the molds, the infections, and the nervous system dysfunction. And so you can address one of those things and experience a little bit of an improvement, but you don't get complete resolution until you address them all. And part of that, and that's regardless of what your labs show. Because I've been fooled so many times by labs, I don't even test labs anymore. We just go through a process where we address all the heavy metals, all the chemicals, all the molds and mycotoxins, and all the different infections, including the viruses and the bacteria and the yeast and the spirochetes, the Lyme disease, the co-infections, the parasites, and then also the nervous system dysfunction. Because I want to make sure when people are done with my program that we've left no stone unturned, and their likelihood of success is so much higher when we're addressing 99% of all of the potential causes out there, right? So the reason why you felt a little bit better is because there are viruses that were present, and this was addressing it, but it was like pulling one nail out of the bottom of your foot when you've got another 10 there.
Yeah. Yeah, years later, after going through certification in biological medicine or regulatory systems of the body and understanding that maybe these things exist because you've got a perfect little plot of soil for them to grow, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to saying, well, I need to check this off the box. I've taken care of Lyme. Now it's the viruses. Now it's the mold. Now it's the metals. And I do hear that a lot in this space, is that people are constantly chasing the next hot topic of conversation, whether it is the spike protein or it's glyphosate. But it's really, we are quantum beings. It's this holism, right, that plays into overall wellness. And it's everything that from my experience comes into the conversation about robust health.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, and it's this, we have a 4-step process that we take people through, and we replace deficiencies, which is what the majority of naturopaths and functional medicine doctors and stuff like that do. And you can really help people with that. And then we remove the toxicities and the infections, the toxic five. But it really is this push and pull where there are deficiencies that need to be replaced, mitochondrial health, et cetera, hormones. But then there are all these toxins that are draining your vital life force, that are really not allowing that terrain. Because there's this, what you're talking to is this idea that, we really should be able to heal ourselves. And it's like, okay, well, how do we remove those barriers to healing? Is it replacing a deficiency because you have a genetic issue? Or is it removing toxins and infections because they're causing the deficiencies?
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that system. Before we do that, I just want to mention, you said you don't do testing.
I don't.
I'm very much on the fence on a lot of it. It's very expensive to get a vibrant total tox panel, which looks at metal and mycotoxins and spirochetes and co-infections. And then we need to retest. So a lot of times for me, early on in my chapter of my road to wellness, that was it was a rate limiting factor. I actually couldn't afford the doctor and the testing. So a lot of times I would have to go through that thought process. It was like, well, what am I going to change? What am I willing to do about it? So that's usually the road I took because I'm curious. Like, I do like to still look at labs. I do like to look at things like, goodness, anything from metals or mitochondrial function to, how my body is performing, like how is my microbiome performing, not what's in it. And so there are some things I like to look at, but to your point, we're human beings, and there are certain operating guidelines that we will always benefit from following. So I do believe it's possible to skip a lot of these diagnostic tests. And I think we're also very new as far as how good are they? Because I've seen them change very dramatically from lab to lab. I don't know if that's been your experience as a medical professional.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I used to test every 3 months on all of these different markers, and it was very expensive for folks. And what I found over the course of 12 months is that all of these toxins and infections ended up coming out. Now, the challenge with the testing is that if you do a urine test, which is really the gold standard for whether you're doing heavy metals with a provocation, or you're doing chemicals, or you're looking at mold, mycotoxins, or even some infections with like some of the PCR or DNA testing, they're all really dependent on your ability to detoxify and get the thing out of the body into the urine that you're looking for. And they're all, for the most part, bound up in the tissues. So they're in your organs, other components, other parts of the body, and they're not really coming out in the urine. The urinary test really is more of a test of your ability to excrete than it is your total body burden.
Yeah.
So consequently, when I've been fooled time and time again, that's why I'm like, you know what? We're just going to go ahead and treat. It's going to save you $5,000 to $10,000 over the course of a year because we're not doing this testing, and people just have success, and everything that I do is natural. So I'm only doing herbs, vitamins, and minerals now. And so consequently, when you're doing double and you're using herbs that are kind of complementary, you're doing double and triple support where you're going to be able to get at every single infection that's possibly happening in the body because you're using a different combination of these herbs that are all really cumulative. Just the likelihood of success goes up. So that's one of the issues, is the urinary testing, is this test of excretion. Another one is that if you're doing PCR testing where you're looking for the DNA of the infection, it has to be found in that particular compartment. So if you're doing a blood test for PCR and the infection is found in the joints, you're not going to find it. Or if you're looking in the urine and it's in the joints or the muscles, you're not going to find it. And then when you're doing something like Lyme disease or like a serology test, which is really looking at the immune system's reaction to an infection, by nature and of these illnesses, the immune system is dysfunctional. So then you're asking a dysfunctional immune system to give you an accurate response. And if you don't diagnose it, you won't treat it. So I can't tell you how many people come to see me and they're like, yeah, I don't have Lyme disease. I don't have mycoplasma. I don't have Bartonella because I did this test and this test showed that I don't have it. And I was like, let's just treat you anyway. And sure enough, the symptoms go away. So, the testing is just too imperfect. And as humans, we really want certainty. We want to know. But unfortunately, and that's, I think one of the spiritual lessons of going through this process is this notion that we have control, right? So it's like being able to release control, and understand what we can control. We can control our reactions. We can control the next step we take. I know you talk a lot about mindset, which we do in our program, and we do a lot of nervous system retraining and how important those things are. And it's like, you need to take the next step. You need to continue and move forward. But let's hedge our bets and let's understand the reality of lab testing. And let's go ahead and let's make sure we address everything. Now, just as a caveat, I do test for a couple things in blood. I think that vitamin D, B12, thyroid can potentially be helpful. That's about it.
Yeah. Awesome. Can I ask you a little bit about just your personal journey with chronic fatigue? because it was probably was a phase while you were looking at some diagnostic, I can only imagine, probably looked at everything. Was there a were there a few areas in which were like, oh, these were massive burdens on my system that you discovered?
I definitely had a lot of positives when I did my testing back in 2010, 2011.
Mm-hmm.
Where I did have mycotoxins, I did have heavy metals, I did have chemicals. The challenge that I had was I didn't have anybody to guide me as I was kind of like learning this. And that as I started to detoxify, I felt worse. And I was the main breadwinner at that point in time. And I was trying to manage this big clinic, and I needed my brain function, and I needed to be able to bring home the bacon. And so that was a real challenge. And so I couldn't really detoxify until I learned how in step 3 of our process, how I needed to open up my detoxification pathways and then do what I call the die-off dance, which is basically as you're killing something, you have to make sure that it's able to exit the body. Otherwise, you're just going to feel worse. And so that's kind of that dance that we go through, where we want to make this as graceful for people as possible, but they have to remember that you've got these toxins and infections in your body for decades. And so extricating them, pulling them out of the tissues, getting out of the body, we try to make it as graceful as possible, but there's a lot of bumps in the road. And so there is a lot of mindset work that has to happen around, I'm going to get there. It's 3 steps forward, 1 step back. And when I have that 1 step, it may feel like it's the end of the world, but we have to remember that it's just a step back and that we're going to get there.
I'll share this with anybody listening to this today. When I would start to feel better and maybe get a couple days strung together, it was so much worse to go back and have a day where I was on the couch because I started to see the light. And there's this great line in Shawshank Redemption, and the one character says, hope is a dangerous thing. And I started to feel hope that I would get better. And the mind games, that limbic system looping down on the severity of the one day versus the 3 days of wellness was really tricky to manage, and I didn't find the not neurolinguistic programming, the Annie Hoppers, the DNRS, the Gupta program, the Reorigin programs until much, much later in my journey. Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah.
So let's no, you go.
I thought the Shawshank quote that you were going to say, the one that I really like is that I had to walk through a mile of shit in order to come out clean on the other side. And sometimes it kind of feels like that, where you're going to get there, but you got to go through some.
Yeah, so good. What a brilliant movie. What a brilliant movie. Sure. Can we talk about your process a little bit? Because you've alluded to this 4 or 5 step process. I'd love to understand that a little more.
Correct. Yeah. 4-step process, toxic 5. It's a little bit confusing. Some people are, but so the first step is to figure out the causes that an individual has that we're going to address. So we're going to address the toxic 5 in everybody and hypercoagulation, but then, is there concussion issues, traumatic brain injury that we need to address? Are there other thyroid issues? We're also going to address adrenals and mitochondria in everybody. Vitamin D. What are your lifestyle habits like? What needs to be addressed there? We're going to address the mindset and the nervous system retraining in everybody. We already know about 70 or 80% of what we're going to do to make sure that we leave no stone unturned, but then there are nuances and we want to make sure that we personalize everybody's program. So that's the first step, is figuring out what causes people have. And we're looking at over 30 different causes to make sure we leave no stone unturned. So this process is all about step 4 in getting rid of the toxins and infections, but we have to set the stage up for success. So in step 2, we start by replacing the deficiencies. The adrenals, the mitochondria, the thyroid, which I call the big 3, because they're really the biggest needle movers. They're going to decrease inflammation. They're going to make you more resilient, give you a little bit of a bump in energy. Oftentimes in the first month or two, about 50% of people go from a jump of like 1 point, so either a 3 out of 10 to a 4 out of 10 or a 4 out of 10 to a 5 out of 10, and have a little bit less crashing. So that really just helps make the rest of the process so much easier. And it helps when we get into the die-off in step 4, because die-off is really hard on the adrenals and the mitochondria. So we want to make sure that those are all optimized. For other hormone stuff, vitamins, minerals, lifestyle habits. So replacing all of those are going to end up serving you throughout the process. So that's step 2.
Mm-hmm.
And then step 3 is opening up those detox pathways, the way that these toxins and infections are going to get out of the body. So we've got the liver and the kidney and the lymph and the neurolymph that's in the brain and the gallbladder and the intestines. All of those pathways need to be open in order to be able to have success. Now, is that all we do for those? No, because when you go into step 4, you're going to have to pivot back and do that die-off dance where we're going to have to increase some of the step 3 support. But you've already got the stage set to make step 4 that much easier. And everything that we're using is going to be herbal and natural.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we get into step 4, that's when we're working through this process of removing the heavy metals, the chemicals, the molds, the infections, and the nervous system dysfunction. One last thing on that is that it's more than just getting rid of them individually. What's important to remember is that they're all kind of bound up into what I call a toxic matrix, where when you start to pull one thing out, the other things end up releasing, which is why it's so important, which is why partly why the testing is also inaccurate, because it could be that the mycotoxins are all bound up in this toxic matrix. And until you remove some sort of infection or heavy metal, all of a sudden the mycotoxins are going to get released. And if you don't have a binder, an AC, glutathione, whatever it is on board, you're going to feel worse, and we're not going to know why. And so that's why we go through this process of making sure that we're addressing everything, because we know that even if we were to test, that there's going to be new things that are going to be released once you open up this toxic matrix, or once you break through the biofilm where a bunch of these toxic 5 or toxic 4 are hiding. That's the 4-step process.
Amazing. Can we go into the timeline of some of these journeys? I got a friend I'm facilitating, pairing him with practitioners right now, and from my experience, this is not like a 6-week program. It's not like a 12-week program. This is like some of these burdens are going to take years to. It doesn't mean it's years to feel better, but it's a longer timeline than I think people want to admit. It sounds painful to examine when you're like talking to somebody and sitting them down and saying, I can promise you this by this date, but I don't see that happen. I see it be, if you would have told me in 2011 that we're 2025 and I would still be working with it, I think I'd be pretty darn depressed. Like that it's still a practice, right? So how do you frame that for people? And what are the timelines you see when people come in, let's say they're like a 1 out of 10?
Yeah, so there's a number of key things that I tell people, this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. What I found is that everybody gets better who addresses the toxic 5. It's just a question of how much time it takes for them, specifically, individually, depending on how fast they can detoxify. But when they join the program and they fill out the intake form within the first couple of days, I provide them with a plan of my best guess of what they're going to be doing over the next 12 months within 7 business days. So they have that plan in 7 business days. And then their whole job is to implement and reach out when they need help. And we've got a number of different ways to kind of support them along the way. And so step 2, replacing those deficiencies, takes about 2 months. We introduce one supplement at a time to make sure I give people a Google spreadsheet. And then there's a column for them to put in the date that they introduce something and then any reactions that they have so that we can communicate and we can make sure that we're pivoting. It's really important. This whole idea about pivoting throughout the program, they're going to pivot 20 to 50 times over the next 12 months. And so, I give them my best guess, but then it's all about how do we personalize it for an individual? And we guarantee a response to any question they have in 2 business days so that they can ask a question, they can get that response. They're not waiting months to get in to see the provider. They can pivot and then they can move forward and take that next step. So they're introducing one supplement at a time so we can see exactly what's happening. So step 2 in replacing the deficiencies takes about 2 months. Step 3, opening up the detox pathways, takes about 2 months. So then we're at month 4 or so. And then step 4, where we're removing the toxic 5, takes anywhere between and 18 months, generally. And so at that point, we're in step 4, 12, I tell people it's going to take at least 12 months to get better, where the magic really happens around month 9. And the reason why that happens is so from at the end of month 4, then you start introducing step 4 supplements, which is going to be addressing the heavy metals, the chemicals, the molds, the infections. And you're doing the nervous system retraining this whole time because that just accelerates things and it makes you get better faster.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's from, month 5 to month 9 is a good 4 months where you're addressing all of these different causes. And that's when you start to, the benefits really happen when you've removed a significant amount of the toxic 5. And so for some people, depending on how fast you can move through the program, and this is how another way we individualize it, we want to detoxify people at a rate that their body can tolerate so that they don't feel worse. So it's just a question of, okay, which is the most important toxin? When we hit that one, the toxin or the infection that we're addressing, you're tolerating the treatment, you're getting it out of your body. How fast can you do that? That is significantly related to the results. So, your symptoms resolve at the same rate at which you're able to get rid of the toxic 5. And it just depends on how long it takes. And that's the individualization that we provide. And it does require a lot of that mindset work because it's like 3 steps forward, 1 step back. And when you start to feel better, when you have a down day, it's the same as all those down days you had before, but instead of having 7 down days a week, now you're having 3 or 4 down days a week, but they feel so much worse because of that comparison with how you're feeling now. And so there's a lot of mindset work that needs to happen, and we try to be there for people when they're struggling, and we just encourage them, hey, if you're struggling, please reach out, let us know so that we can be there to support you.
Yeah, I that's why I love having a limbic system retraining program on board every day, all day. A lot of the groups run independent groups. You can get in with a live person, a live coach. You can talk to other people. People are very aware of the language that they're using as to not to trigger someone back into a response. I just can't stress that enough. And oftentimes people tell me, I'm having issues. This is continuing. I'm not getting better. I've tried this and that and that. I'm like, have you tried something to support the limbic system? And they're like, yeah, I've heard about that. But it's rare that people go all in on that one. And it's probably one of the most affordable therapies, a few $100s for the whole year of
Right.
coaching, and it's interactive and it's live. Yeah. I hope everybody hears that. I just from the heart, stack that one, and especially if you're in this loop that is considered chronic.
Yeah, about 6 months ago, we created our own program and put it, alongside what we're doing. But there's plenty of times where I tell people, okay, I get on free calls with people to see if we're a good fit to work together. And I'll say, you know what, right now, it seems like you've got mast cell activation syndrome. You're quite sensitive to supplements. You're going to be a lot more successful in our program if you do a nervous system retraining first, because I have found that is the number one thing that helps people decrease their sensitivities. So I'll say, go do that for 3 to 6 months and then come back. Or if I'm seeing that, there's really some mindset work that they need to do or some other things, I'm like, you're not a great fit for us right now. Go do this first. Or there's a lot of people, lately I've been talking a lot about, hey, if you've done brain retraining and you're not better, come talk to us, because what I've seen is that it really is the toxic 5 that all have to be addressed. There are some people who get, close to 100% better just by doing the nervous system or the limbic system retraining. And that's wonderful. And then what about the rest of us? Right. And so, it's going to be this combination. But yeah, I tell people that, the nervous system dysfunction can be 90% of your problem. So you have to be doing the nervous system retraining, and whether it's nervous system or limbic system, I just use that as a wastebasket term, whatever. But like, you have to be doing that work in earnest in order to get better in our program in general.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a piece of the puzzle. Oftentimes I see, at least in my path, I can see where lifestyle, where my ability I needed to achieve to feel love. So I was probably going to drive myself until I got sick. It was probably in the cards, I could say, to some degree, because it was never going to, I was never going to be able to work hard enough, right, to feel like I have value just for being me. I actually don't need to do anything. Now that component is still part of my DNA, and it sets me up in this capitalistic society to be successful, but I have to watch it, right?
Right.
I
Me
can
too.
I can see. I have to watch it. I have to be aware. So that's that drives me to integrate these things that are a practice. Whether it's right before our podcast, it was like, I'm gonna 20 minutes is me and the dog. We're both gonna go sniff things and wait till he poops, but we're gonna be outside in the light. And we're gonna wander around in nature. It might be this morning. I got in an oxygen bath. I'm gonna sit here and do a lukewarm 20-minute bath and absorb some oxygen and breathe. I'll say this. I've built the container, I've built the roadmap of the day to complement like what I want to create. And I have these 3 questions I keep asking people. I'm like, how do I feel? How do you feel? What do you want? What are you willing to do about it? And I promise you there's a path there. I promise. I've seen it unfold. Let me ask you this, as far as making a path for things other than self to leave the body, can you talk about some specifics when you say your drainage pathways? Like in my mind, I'm like, oh, I'm going to go do dry brushing. I'm going to bounce in the trampoline outside. I'm going to get in the Flowpresso. I'm going to go get in the sauna for 35, 40 minutes today. What are some things that you love for mechanically opening up those drainage pathways?
Yeah, so I would say yes, yes, and yes, though we can talk about saunas because there are pros and cons to those. But yeah, we want people to get their Goldilocks dose of movement for their lymph system, besides doing some lymph brushing and then some lymph massage. But by that, I mean that, we want you to move as much as you can without feeling worse. Because everybody in our program, they've got post-exertional malaise. If you exert yourself too much, you feel worse. So that's kind of the Goldilocks dose that we're talking about. So yeah, whether we're doing lymph or whether you're consuming 3 liters of water a day, which is essential when you're trying to detoxify, whether you're eating sugar, so it's so much about what you're not eating. So avoiding gluten and dairy and sugar, alcohol, processed foods, that makes such a big difference. That essentially is a bit of a detoxification as well. And that's not necessarily mechanical, but that can be really helpful. If people can do, I almost said bungee jumping, trampoline, what you call it? Yes.
Oh, I have like a full on like 18-footer outside. I have a full massive backflip trampoline. So I get on that thing. It just because it's fun. I mean, I like the rebounder, don't get me wrong, but I have a yard. So this has been for at least top of the pandemic. In middle of the pandemic, when I was really struggling with the lack of social connection, I went and bought a trampoline on Facebook Marketplace because I had one as a kid, and I was like, oh my God, this thing is a blast.
Nice.
I just bounce or flop all over.
I love it. So yeah, so the rebounder, that was the word I was looking for. So that, to improve your lymph. And then, for liver, besides the water, you can also be doing castor oil packs, for brain detoxification, making sure that you're sleeping 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night, getting good sleep. Your brain is going to detoxify. It basically shrinks by 60%, getting those toxins out every single night. Gallbladder, intestines, making sure that you're having a good bowel movement at least every day, if not 2, and if you need some magnesium to make that happen, putting your feet up a little bit so that you're doing a little bit of you're straightening out the colon, by bringing your knees into your chest. I can't remember the name of those platforms now, but potties, squatty potties. Yeah. So
I
those
always tell
really
people
helpful.
that they're fake health and wellness people. Like if I walk into your house and they're like, "Oh, look, this is what I'm doing. This is my son." I'm like, "You don't have a squatty potty. You are not. This is all fake." Like you need, and it's one of the most frequent gifts that I send to people if I go to their house and they'll be like, "What is this thing you just mailed me?" I'm like, "The legs flip down. You're gonna slide under your toilet, and you'll thank me later."
And then the next one needs to be the bidet, right? The bidet attachment to go along with it, right?
My friend Caitlin I was at her house and the seat warmed. I was like, okay.
Wow. It's a game changer.
Yep. Amazing.
Oh, and then that's the other thing is so turning your shower to cold or doing some sort of cold therapy, as long as you can tolerate it, as long as it doesn't make you feel worse. Wonderful for mitochondria, great for detoxification. So these are a number of things that we include in our program, but of course it's always about like, what can you do depending on if your energy is a 1 out of 10 and you're having a hard time getting out of bed, or if your energy is a 4 out of 10 or a 5 out of 10. So, it's, that's where the individualization, the personalization comes into.
Yeah. Yeah. I launched a program like 2 months ago, which I mentioned it a couple times, called Biological Blueprint. And it's just education around the regulatory systems of the body. But
Nice.
we do a full module on, I say temperature is medicine, and how is it going to be medicine for you, Evan? Because that will be different for me. Like I'm a outdoor shower in the morning, and then I jump in the bath. I might do 30 seconds. Sometimes I do 3 minutes. I keep it around 50, 52 these days. But for me, I get such a great boost for brain power. It really like is complementary to my physiology. Now, it wasn't that way when I started. When I started, it was my first ice bath. I shook for 6 hours. It was way too much for my system. I literally was shaking. I was like, I need a hot shower. My body couldn't regulate it. But over time, with the interplay of the heat and the cold and just being outside more without a jacket, I've developed that where I feel very comfortable in the cold, very comfortable. And enjoy I enjoy be like, people, don't you have a jacket? I'm like, I'm actually feel really good. I'm enjoying this cold hormetic stressor, and I'm enjoying leaning into the breath and just experiencing the sensation, as opposed to wanting to. I always say, within our training, it's living in that 72-degree box in which we're a comfortable little pet who isn't fit to be a survival animal in the wild. It's like, bring back in some of those elements. If you think about the majority of human survival, how much time we just didn't have these comforts, right? And so temperature, how could that be brought back in as to medicine, as far as like how do I retrain the wild animal inside of me?
Yeah, and I think that it also really speaks to discomfort and becoming more comfortable with discomfort.
Yeah.
Right. And realizing that we can, like when I turn the shower to cold in the morning, it's so uncomfortable. And I'm reminding myself I can do uncomfortable things. I can do hard things. Like I can
Yeah.
do this. And that reframing, that is that nervous system retraining, the mindset work that reminds you when you come across something where let's say you're having a health issue and you're ready to give up, that you choose not to, and you choose
Hmm.
to take that next step and move forward. So yeah, I couldn't. And it's resilience training.
Yeah.
This is something we're working on with our 17-year-old right now. It's like, it's not the end of the world, right? Like how can you see that this is just something that you have to navigate around? You have to learn how to pivot. You have to learn how to improve, and things get easier, but they're hard so that you can learn something and that you can become more resilient.
Yeah. Agreed. Evan, in your practice, do you see a lot of people in person, or is it mostly online?
I'm 100% online now.
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah. And so, yeah, everything is done over Zoom. We have an online community, whether it's one-on-ones or groups, so we provide a ton of support, so that we're essentially in your pocket. And so you have the support on a daily basis. But yeah, it allows me to practice across state and national lines. About 10% of our people come from outside of the United States now. And allowed us to support more people.
That's great. That's great. What about, we get into this world of chronic illness. I spent well over $300,000 trying to get better. Probably more than that now. How does someone prepare the scope of like to financially afford, again, to work with you for a year, for 18 months? What does that look like?
Yeah, so at this point right now, we tell people that it's approximately $15,000 over 12 months for the majority of what they're going to need. So that's going to include supplements, labs, program fees. The only thing that it doesn't cover is if we find that you're living in a moldy environment and you need mold remediation, it does not cover that. If we find that you have an infection in your mouth from cavitations or whatever, and you need cavitation surgery, it doesn't cover that. But, I feel like, for $1,500 a month, all in, Like, that's really reasonable to get your life back.
Oh, it's nothing. I mean, compared to what I spent. And how long have you guys been doing this program totally online?
I went online in 2018.
Okay.
So,
A good,
yeah, 7 years now.
wow, good chunk of time. Good chunk of time. Yeah, it's such a great resource for people to have because the the monthly fees. Let's talk about this too, because I'm a big tech guy. I love the toys, mostly because it's my way to have like toys as an adult. But I love red light panels, huge fan of pulsed electromagnetic field as a supportive therapy. Flowpresso, full body lymphatic drainage. That's a medical device, not a home device. What else? I built a big community sauna outside because I like community and I found there's some like magic beyond magic that happens when we do these things with friends. What's the newest? I got a Bimini machine, which is nano bubbled oxygen therapy in the bathtub, which is like I've got 100 sleep score for 14 days in a row. That's never happened for me. That's been amazing. I love the tools, right? How do you help people find discernment in the space when there are so many really great tools, but these things are we're talking most of the tools we're talking about are more expensive than your whole program,
Right.
right? So how do you help people discern in this marketplace? It's like, well, should I buy this? Should I buy that? What am I looking for? What do I need to support my physiology at this time?
Yeah, I find that one of the biggest challenges in the program is when people feel worse. And
Yeah.
so I always want to have as much control as I can around knowing why they're feeling worse. And so for me, that comes from introducing one supplement at a time. Half of our supplements, once you get into step 3, the majority of them, almost all of them, are tinctures. So you're ramping up by a drop or two at a time. So I have very good control, and we're only changing one thing at a time. So I
Mm-hmm.
know when they feel worse and why they're feeling worse. If we're ramping up on a tincture that's supposed to remove heavy metals and chemicals and you feel worse, I know that it's because we're pulling them out too quickly. It's because you have a body burden of heavy metals and chemicals, right? And so that's how I maintain control. With a lot of these therapies that you're talking about, they can be very helpful. People ask me all the time, high dose IV vitamin C, ozone therapy, hyperbaric oxygen, red light, PEMF, all those things. I have seen too many people feel worse when they're doing them. And
Mm.
sometimes, like with PEMF, I had some people who were doing Beamers once upon a time, and they were set back for a couple of months. And it's just increasing oxygen and blood flow to the capillaries and to the
Mm-hmm. Yep.
organs, which is so important. And so what we do is we're addressing hypercoagulation and microclots a little bit differently. So using some fibrinolytic enzymes where people can still feel worse, but the setback is not as bad. So when I get people to kind of like towards the end where their energy is now 8, 9, 10 out of 10, and we want to see what's left. Like I was just on the call with somebody yesterday, and she's like, can I do Ibu now? I have these 4 sessions. And I said, yes, because she did Ibu 3 months ago, felt like crap, and it put her back a month.
Yeah.
Right. So because sometimes, people, even though they're going through our program, they're still thinking there's got to be something else. And they hear something and they go see somebody locally, and then they get a treatment and then they feel worse. And they're asking me why they're feeling worse. And I say, well, what's changed? They're like, I added this thing in. I was like, don't add that thing in. Trust the process. Right.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
but it's hard because the process is long. It's
It's
12
long.
months, if
Yep.
not longer. And so they're like, really, and they're not getting, most of the time people don't feel anything until month 9, right?
Yeah.
So it's really hard to stick with that. But when they start to feel worse, when they do these other things, then they kind of get that sense. And even with red light, if you there are some people who get die off with red light. It's not a lot of
That's
people.
true.
Sometimes they're doing more than 5 minutes, and so it's all about managing die off and
Yeah.
managing people feeling worse. And so, like I said, these are great technologies, but they're just not for people when they're kind of going through my program, or at least I haven't figured out how to do them low dose enough where
Mm.
where it can be beneficial. Now with sauna, the challenge with saunas is that the immune system functions better at a higher temperature, so that's good for the
Yeah.
immune system, but it
There
starts
you go.
killing infections, and then you have die off. And then the frequencies, if you're doing far infrared, near infrared, mid infrared, those are all they potentially can also kill infections. And you can be fine in a sauna. You're like, I'm doing sauna every single day. I don't have a problem. And so oftentimes I'll say, yeah, you can just continue doing it. But sometimes they're fine until they're not. And sometimes that has to do with just getting down to the next layer where maybe you're breaking through biofilm, you're getting to your next layer of healing, and then all of a sudden you're getting a bunch of die-off and you don't know why, because you haven't changed the sauna that you've been doing for the last 6 months. You're stable on your tinctures, whatever it is. And sometimes it can kind of throw a wrench into things too. So I try to be accommodating, be like, I know you love your sauna. I know you're cold all the time. Go ahead and continue to do the sauna, but just know we have to remember this if you're feeling worse and we're not sure why.
Yeah, it's so important. It's so important. Yes, I do. Just all the things you said. It's the microenvironment. I always give people the example of, like, remember in your chemistry class when you put the burner under the chemicals, it did nothing, and then you increase the temperature and all of a sudden there was a chemical reaction? You're changing that microenvironment in the terrain. So of course things are going to work a little bit differently. It's wild to think about, man. I don't know if you experience this. I was so intolerant to cold. It would hurt
I was
me.
too.
It would hurt me to walk. And I was in New York City because I was walking everywhere, right? Man, as my feet would I'm like, I hurt from the cold. Not that way anymore. That all that stuff has changed. And I can personally feel where 10, 12 years ago, I was that hypersensitive person where I would introduce a new therapy and I would have it would be the polar opposite of what should have happened. My doctor was like, well, that shouldn't happen. I'm like, well, it is happening. And it was like most common feedback I had. That shouldn't happen. And so I had to take ownership of like, wait, this is me. My nervous system, my physiology is choosing to respond this way because of something that I'm bringing to the table. It's not my doctor's fault. So letting go of that frustration and that anger for me was a really important piece of it. I generally am pretty iron-like now in my response to most things. I respond very well in a positive way. And that's changed over time.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
changed. And like you, I've been doing this process of drainage, detox, movement, elite nutrition, sleep hygiene since, really 2009.
Slow and steady wins the race. The body likes small changes, right? And
Yeah,
I appreciate you saying that because, trying to be objective in this space, where it's nobody's fault. I mean, you want to work with somebody who's seen it before so that they can, if somebody says that's not supposed to happen, then you're probably not working with the right person.
that's
Because
right.
you want to be working with somebody who's like, yeah, I've seen this a number of times before, and this is the reason why it happened, and this is how we work around it, right? So yes, it's not their fault, and they may not be as specialized as you need, right? If you want to learn piano, you go to see a piano teacher. You don't ask your car mechanic. And if you want to fix your car, you go to your car mechanic. Unless your car mechanic is a expert pianist, right? But
Yeah.
so it's that same sort of idea. So if you've got a Crohn's disease, you want to work with somebody specializing in Crohn's. And we've kind of carved our niche out with chronic fatigue syndrome and long COVID. That's what we do all day long. And so, we're just going to have a different knowledge set than somebody who doesn't do that, who like dabbles, right? So
Yeah,
it's like finding a coach, right? You want to find a coach for as specific of a problem as you have that you want to resolve, no matter what it is.
that's right. Get your coach with their expert 10,000 hours.
Exactly, right.
That's it. You're right. I mean, that's what I did. That's who I look for in a voice teacher. I was like, I want the woman that is coaching the alphabas in Wicked. That's who I want. Do you know what I mean? I was like, I need this. Very specifically, the last big show I did in New York was called Cagney the Musical. And I was a standby for Cagney, who James Cagney had this very unique affect when he spoke, and I was getting so much jaw tension. So I went and found, I was like, and he never left stage. And so I went and found a great coach who was working with the Alphabas on Broadway. I was like, I need an elite level coach. And she was gold, right? She was very expensive at the time. But I was like feeling a certain way. I was willing to do anything to solve it. And so that was my choice point. I decided to invest. It was very challenging at the time. I was like, oh, this is too expensive, blah, 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 blah.
It's always worth it. right?
It's always worth it.
You're not going to miss the money, and you're going to get the result that you want, and that's going to allow you to become the better version of yourself.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's wild. Can we do some quick fire questions?
Yes, and I should say one thing in terms of like the $15,000 for the program. I realize like people don't have to pay that all up at once. Okay, just so that people know who are listening to this, right? It's not like you have
Yep.
to drop that kind of.
Yep. And also I will say this too and I don't know I don't know the program, right? But for your coaching and the plan and some testing and the therapies and your nutritional supplements, you could do that alone. I could do that in a couple months. I could log into my full script tomorrow and be like, oh, I want to do this high dose urolithin A, and I want to do this, I want to do the body bio phosphatidylcholine, and I could go up to $800 a month in like 5 bottles of stuff.
Right.
So yeah, you can quickly get there. What are your thoughts on methylene blue?
So I started using methylene blue when it first came out for COVID. Started testing it in a number of people, and I stopped using it. It's great for boosting mitochondria, boost it 200 to 400% potentially, but it's also an antimicrobial and it has interactions with neurotransmitters. And so I found that I had a hard time controlling the die off, and I found better tools that I could use where I would have more control of the die off. So once again, making people not feel worse, right? And then the interactions with the neurotransmitter stuff was just a little bit hard for people who are on SSRIs, antidepressants, anti-anxiety, a number of those things. So I just any tool that is going to be a little bit unpredictable for me after I try to get a handle on it and I'm having challenges, I usually try to find something that I have a little bit more control over that works just as well. And I was able to do that. And that just makes people feel better when I know why they're feeling worse and I can fix it and it doesn't set them back months. And so that was just the challenge that I was experiencing. But I do think that it is a good tool. And I do think that if you are going to use it, you just have to ramp up very slowly and make sure that you're working with somebody.
I would join with you in that. Coffee enemas.
Big fan. Not a lot of people are willing to do them, but they're really great for step 3, for opening up the detox pathways. And also, once you get into the die-off dance, if we find that we're kind of like maxing out financially on the amount of die-off support that you're taking in order to be able to get through the process, it's like, let's get you doing some coffee enemas, even if it's one every couple days, one a day. Yeah, it can be an incredibly great support.
Yeah. It's one of the ones that's most frustrating to me because I want to find support in the medical literature and it's pretty non-existent. Like there's people will often say boost glutathione, however, 7,000%. And I'm like, I've actually seen the negative. I've seen it doesn't boost glutathione. However, my experience, especially when I was in chronic fatigue, I would have beautiful windows of clarity, definitely had diminished pain. I had scar tissue around my bowels, so bowel function has something that to this day I have to work on and be aware of. I'm very high risk for an obstruction, and it's been magical. It's actually I could say they probably saved my life a couple of times from avoiding the ER. Anyways, thank you for that. Liver gallbladder flushes.
I think it depends on how those are being done. I think the idea of those being stones that are coming out is not true. I think that's more saponification, which is basically you're making a soap from the oil and the base. And
acid,
so I don't
oil
think
and acid base, yep.
Right, yeah. So I don't think that you're actually getting out the stones. I've seen some people feel a little bit better, but I don't have enough data to say for sure like they're bad or they're not. I think that they're a lot of work for not a lot of benefit. And I'm trying to remember if I've heard any negative reactions. I haven't, but there are probably some out there, but I don't use them.
Yeah, same. I haven't done it either. I've always been a little worried, again, all that fat at once. But so what we're talking about, we're basically saying it's the liver gallbladder. If you haven't heard about this, audience, it's half a cup of olive oil. It's like grapefruit juice. It's malic acid, 4 to 5 days loaded up to, and then you drink that before you go to bed, lay on your right or left side, and then you're drinking Epsom salts the next morning. So you are pooping your brains out. And people are always showing these stones. But that's what I have always thought. It's the fat and the acid coagulated into some type of a rock, and obviously bile from the body. But who knows? I have not done one yet. I have had friends that have had amazing experiences, and they swear by it. So who knows? Maybe in the future. There was one other one I wanted to ask. Oh, I want to ask you this. You don't have to answer it because I know it's a triggering topic. Post-pandemic, we're in such a little polarized world right there. There's lots of conversations around immune system dysfunction, both from COVID as well as the COVID vaccine. And for my money, I'm not a medical doctor, but I'm wondering what people are seeing. Do you see people that have had negative effects that you can link to, like doing a vaccination, or is it just they've had COVID 2 times, or is it impossible to separate those?
No, we can separate them. I mean, sometimes people don't know that they've had a COVID virus. And so, if they had the virus at the same time that they had the SHOT, then it's hard to know. But we've definitely seen people who've had the shot and ended up with long COVID. And so we call it spike protein illness. It can come from the vaccine. It can come from the virus. And when you look at the VAERS data, which is that database that's self-reporting, the stats are really amazing at the number of challenges that people have had from both. And it's very underreported. So people are having a lot more symptoms than they report, and the numbers are still crazy high on that database. It's managed by the CDC. It's not something that is necessarily validated or perceived as valid by the conventional community, but it is, I think it can still provide some window into what's going on. And there's so many people that I see who end up coming to see me because they have those issues from both.
Yeah, from both. Yeah, it's just such an interesting time. I've always thought, and this is, again, I'm not a medical doctor, just in my head, we have the 2 branches of the immune system, right? And one's a memory that we're building, and then we have this adaptive branch. And so if we're always building up, if it's like I'm always doing curls on my left arm and I never work out my right arm in the gym, then the balance of my immune system can be off. So making choices about how I'm going to manage that long term in a human being, that's what I always think about that. It's like I do have some sort of a natural adaptive immunity, right? And I benefit from getting sick, and then getting over the illness is a thing.
Right. Well, and when we remember at its most basic function, the immune system is supposed to get crap out of the body that's not supposed to be there, which is why the toxic 5 is the hill that I'm going to die on. The toxic 4, heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, like the shot and the virus are both in there. And it's basically anything that comes into your body that's not supposed to be there, the immune system is supposed to get rid of. If the immune system isn't able to get rid of, then it's kind of stuck in this ongoing fight where it's trying to get rid of this thing, but the thing is hiding in a cell or whatever it is. And that's inflammation, and inflammation causes all of your symptoms. So if you were to work backwards from all your symptoms, you have a symptom, whether it's a headache or body pain or fatigue or whatever, and that's caused by the immune system reacting to something. And that something is going to be one of the toxic or multiples of the toxic 5, right? And so that's why my whole thing is we need to get rid of that crap out of the body so that the immune system can actually do what it's supposed to do and function normally and manage these other insults that come into part of the reason why people end up getting long COVID, they get this virus, 35% of them, and they ended up with persistent symptoms, loss in smell and taste, body pain, fatigue, whatever. And it's because the immune system was not able to get rid of the virus when it came into the body. It was distracted by the other toxic.
So in toxic 5, heavy metals, mold, infections, toxins.
I say chemicals, heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, and then the nervous system dysfunction.
Nervous system. Yeah, I was going to say nervous system emotions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you don't have to have trauma to have nervous system dysfunction, kind of like what Freddie was saying. It's the same thing for me. I grew up happy childhood, but there were 2 siblings. We're all competing for attention from imperfect humans who have their own issues. And then we go to school and we have relationships with other imperfect humans. And I had rejection from a couple of peer groups throughout time. And then, you see that getting good grades is a way to make your parents happy. all this shit ends up happening and you get nervous system dysfunction. You don't have to have PTSD or some that other trauma in order to have it. So we all have it and we all need to work.
Yeah. And so my final question for you is, so how do you balance out this side of your service as a medical doctor, and what do you do for fun?
Yeah, so I sing and I perform for fun. In the evenings, I have Olympia musical theater singers. So we sing musical theater songs in community. So there's a group we have. I have a dad's group that I go to. I spend time with my family. I love to learn languages. We have dance parties at home where we're dancing hip hop, and especially to like the latest, K-pop Demon Hunter soundtrack. We're enjoying that right now. Yeah, and we love to travel. We're going to be spending a lot of time in Europe over the next couple of years because my daughter's going to be going to school over there. So there's a number of things that I try to balance out what I'm doing with work, and sometimes work becomes more than what I want it to be. But I've kind of worked to this place where I can help a ton of people. I can work from home or wherever I am in the world, so that I can travel while I'm doing it. And I also have a support team. We've got health coaches. People are getting one-on-ones from me and from people who are not me. And we've got the community. So I've got a bunch of people, a bunch of support and structures built to help people reach the finish line that don't require 100% of my time like it used to when I was seeing people one-on-one for 8 hours a day. That just really wasn't sustainable. And so that's kind of how I've done it with my work and trying to balance. And I work from home, so I can, 2 hours a day I have blocked off to help my daughter with her homework.
So fun.
Just trying to make sure that my actions are aligned with my values.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. And give us some of the things that you've done this week that would be in alignment with your program that you do for you still.
So many things that I've mentioned, so I wake up in the morning and I do meditation and I go through my 4-step mindset practice, gratitudes, envisioning my ideal day, looking at any sort of limiting beliefs that I have, flipping them into empowering beliefs, asking myself empowering questions. And then I've also kind of started doing some Jinshin Jitsu. So I'm like holding my fingers while I'm thinking about certain things and working on whatever emotion is kind of like coming up for me. And then, I'm connecting with my wife in the morning and we're chatting about our day. And I wake up my daughter and we have a healthy breakfast. I start off by drinking 2 liters of water, or actually no, a liter of water initially, put some sea salt in there, take my morning supplements, and then I shower. I flip the water to cold at the end for as long as I can. And then I come out and I do my yoga. And then I do my breath work. I did a yoga teacher training at Kripalu back in 2004. And so I have some pranayama that I do as part of that. And then I, get my day started and try to do it with as much spirit and intentionality as I can. At lunchtime, I go for a walk with my wife around the neighborhood. We eat together, mainly a paleo diet. I have the second half of my day. I'll have, calls with friends sometimes, or I've got a voice lesson, at some point twice a week. I'm taking with 2 different voice teachers right now. And so that I have that during the day. And then I meet with my daughter to do her homework. I do that also before I start my day. And then we have dinner together. And then, we're doing something as a family in the evening, or I'm doing something kind of like on my own. We do like to watch some TV, connect in different ways, maybe go for another walk. I like to do some journaling a couple times a week. If I'm having a harder time, I'll do more journaling and have to do more practices. But at this point, those are kind of the things that I feel like they keep me centered.
I love it. I love it. Thank you, Evan, for being a guest. Super, super excited for the audience to hear this. I'm going to get this right out like next week, and hopefully one day we'll get to meet in person.
That would be fun.
Yeah. And I can't wait to come on the show and talk all about
I'm excited to have
the
you on my
things.
podcast. Yeah.
Awesome. Big love.